REM sleep is fascinating. There's this weird stage of our life that happens more toward morning that we call REM sleep. In REM sleep, we are paralyzed. We are experiencing what's called atonia, which just means that we're completely laid out and paralyzed, where we're hallucinating and having these outrageous experiences in our mind. Sleep is this tremendously important period of life because it resets our ability to be focused, alert, and emotionally stable in the wakeful period. We might dream, we might twitch, we might even wake up, but in sleep, we are only in relation to things that are happening within our brain and body, because it turns out that the period that we call sleep and the period we call wakefulness are tethered to one another. What we do in the waking state determines when we fall asleep, how quickly we fall asleep, whether or not we stay asleep, and how we feel when we wake up the next day. Sleep is the absolute foundation of your mental health, your physical health, and your performance in all endeavors. When you open your eyes, light comes into your eyes. Now, the way this system works is that you have a particular set of neurons in your eye, they're called retinal ganglion cells, that perceives a particular type of light and communicates that to this clock that resides right above the roof of your mouth, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus has connections with essentially every cell and organ of your body. We know, based on a lot of evidence, that if you don't get your cortisol and melatonin rhythms right, there are tremendously broad and bad effects on cardiovascular health, dementia, metabolic effects, learning, depression. When we wake up, our eyes open. Now, if we're in a dark room, there isn't enough light to trigger the correct timing of this cortisol melatonin thing. Well, it turns out that these neurons in our eye that set the circadian clock and then allow our circadian clock to set all the clocks of all the cells and organs and tissues of our body responds best to a particular quality of light. What you want to do is get sunlight in your eyes as close to waking as possible. It's critically important that you get outside to get this light. Now, if you can't see the sunrise, once the sun is overhead, the quality of light shifts so that you miss this opportunity to time the cortisol pulse. And that turns out to be a bad thing to do. A late shifted cortisol pulse, in particular a 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. increase in cortisol, is one of the consequences and maybe one of the causes of a lot of anxiety disorders and depression, which means you need a lot of photons, ideally coming from sunlight, to set these clock mechanisms. So looking at your phone or artificial lights is fine if you wake up before sunrise, but it's not going to work to set these clock mechanisms. If you can't see sunlight because of your environment, then you are going to have to opt for artificial light. And in that case, you're going to want an artificial light that either simulates sunlight or has a lot of blue light. Or you might be saying, wait, I've heard blue light is bad for me. Actually, blue light is great for this mechanism during the day. Blue light, in particular blue light and yellow light coming from sunlight, is ideal. If you're going to get it from artificial light because you can't get enough sunlight, well then, artificial lights that are rich in blue wavelengths are going to be ideal for setting this mechanism. Viewing light early in the day, ideally sunlight, is key for establishing healthy sleep-wake rhythms and for allowing you to fall asleep easily at night. You can actually use light to wake up earlier. Jamie Zeitzer and colleagues did a beautiful study showing that if you turn on the lights before waking up, so around 45 minutes to an hour before waking up, even if your eyelids are closed, provided you're not under the covers, after doing that for a few days, that increases your total sleep time and shifts forward the time at which you feel sleepy. It makes you want to go to bed earlier each night. If you're having trouble waking up early and feeling alert early in the day, you're going to want to try and get bright light exposure even before waking up, because it will advance your clock. It's sort of like turning the clock forward. Whereas if you are having trouble waking up early, you definitely don't want to get too much light exposure or any light exposure to your eyes late in the evening and in the middle of the night, because it's just going to delay your clock more and more. So what determines how well we sleep and the quality of our wakeful state? The first force is a chemical force. It's called adenosine. Adenosine is a molecule in our nervous system and body that builds up the longer we are awake. So if you've just slept for 8 or 9 or 10 really deep restful hours, adenosine is going to be very low in your brain and body. If, however, you've been awake for 10, 15 or more hours, adenosine levels are going to be much higher. Adenosine creates a sort of sleep drive or a sleep hunger. When adenosine is low, it's like we're well fed, we're not very hungry. And when adenosine is high, It's like we're fasted for a long time and we tend to be very hungry. So the reason you get sleepy when you've been up for a while is because adenosine is creeping up steadily the longer you've been awake. And a good way to remember this and think about adenosine is to think about caffeine. Caffeine, for most people, except a very small percentage of people, wakes them up. It makes them feel more alert. What that means is that when you ingest caffeine, whether or not it's coffee or soda or tea or in any other form, it binds to the adenosine receptor. It sort of parks there, just like a car would park in a given parking slot. And therefore, adenosine can't park in that slot. So the reason caffeine wakes you up is because it blocks the sleepiness receptor. It blocks the sleepy signal. And this is why when that caffeine wears off, adenosine will bind to that receptor, sometimes with even greater what we call affinity, and you feel the crash. You feel especially tired. If you delay your caffeine intake 90 to 120 minutes after waking, you are doing yourself a great service towards wakefulness and to avoid the crash. And the afternoon crash has another liability to it, which is typically people will emerge from that afternoon crash either grumpy or groggy, and then they'll lean into drinking more caffeine, which can then disrupt their sleep. So wait 90 to 120 minutes after waking in the morning to drink caffeine. As we get sleepy, we tend to shut our eyes, and that's because there are some autonomic centers in the brain, some neurons that control closing of the eyelids when we get sleepy. And then we transition into sleep. And sleep, regardless of how long we sleep, is generally broken up into a series of 90-minute cycles. The more sleep you're getting across the night, the more REM sleep you're going to have. REM sleep is fascinating. It was discovered in the 50s when Sleep Laboratory in Chicago, the researchers observed that people's eyes were moving under their eyelids. The eye movements are not just side to side, they're very erratic in all different directions. There are a couple things are happening besides rapid eye movements. In contrast to slow wave sleep, in REM sleep, serotonin is essentially absent. So this molecule, this neuromodulator that tends to create the feeling of bliss and well-being and just calm, placidity, is absent. In addition to that, norepinephrine, this molecule that's involved in movement and alertness, is absolutely absent. In REM sleep, we are paralyzed. We are experiencing what's called atonia, which just means that we're completely laid out and paralyzed. We also tend to experience whatever it is that we're dreaming about as a kind of hallucination. There's this weird stage of our life that happens more toward morning that we call REM sleep, where we're hallucinating and having these outrageous experiences in our mind, but the chemical that's associated with fear and panic and anxiety is not available to us. It's important because it allows us to experience things, both replay of things that did occur, as well as elaborate contortions of things that didn't occur, and it allows us to experience those in the absence of fear and anxiety. And that, it turns out, is very important for adjusting our emotional relationship to challenging things that happen to us while we were awake. First of all, be careful about ingesting too much caffeine throughout the middle of the day for the reasons that we talked about earlier. Second of all, if you are a napper, naps, provided that they're less than one ultradian cycle, provided they're 20 minutes or 30 minutes or even an hour, can be very beneficial for a lot of people. Naps are great. I love taking naps. Some people, they wake up from naps feeling really groggy. That's probably because they're not sleeping as well as they should at night or as long as they should at night. And so they're dropping into REM sleep or deeper forms of sleep in the daytime. And then they wake up and they feel kind of disoriented. Other people feel great after a nap. So that's another case where, just like with caffeine, you sort of have to evaluate for yourself. We've all experienced that we can stay up if we want to, right? If we want to stay up late on New Year's or we want to push an all-nighter, some people can do that more easily than others, but we're all capable of doing that. But it's very hard to make ourselves fall asleep. And so there's a sort of asymmetry to the way our autonomic nervous system, which governs this alertness, calmness thing, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, there's an asymmetry there where we are more easily able to engage wakefulness and drive wakefulness. We can force ourselves to stay awake. Then we are able to force ourselves to fall asleep. When you have trouble falling asleep, you need to look to some mechanism that involves the body. Meditation, hypnosis, yoga nidra, all involve exhale emphasized breathing, certain ways of lying down and controlling the body. All of those involve using the body to control the mind rather than trying to, wrestle your mind into a certain pattern of relaxation. Any of those are really teaching you to use your body to control your mind and to allow you to explore the mind-body relationship in a way that gives you more control over your mind and the mind-body relationship. What else can we do in order to optimize our sleep? We've talked a lot about the behavioral tools for critical period 3 we have not talked a lot about the supplementation-based tools. There are supplements that for most people will greatly improve their ability to fall and stay asleep. And the three main supplements in that category or that kit of sleep supplements, and I've talked about these before, are magnesium threonate, apigenin, and theanine. You don't necessarily need to take all three, although many people get a synergistic effect from taking all three. In fact, you may not even need to take even one. What I recommend is that if you're already doing all the behavioral tools regularly and you're still having trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, well then you might try one of the supplements within this sleep stack. Don't take anything without consulting your board-certified MD or healthcare professional first. Almost everything that you could take will affect your circadian timing and behavior. Anytime you change what you take or you stop taking something, say you're taking sleeping pills, Ambien or whatever it is, and you stop taking them, your sleep behavior will change. Let's say you take an aspirin and you don't normally take aspirin, you will shift your circadian rhythm. Now, you might not shift it perceptibly, you might not create problems for yourself, but anytime you ingest a compound at high potency, you're going to provide some shift to your circadian rhythm. I just want to touch on some tools that are very commonly used by many people out there, and believe it or not, there is peer-reviewed science on things like eye masks. Do eye masks improve your ability to stay asleep? And indeed, they do. So a lot of people who wear eye masks will wake up because they're too warm if the room is too warm. So if you're going to use an eye mask to keep light out, definitely make sure the room and your sleeping environment and your bed are cool enough in order for you to stay asleep. Other tools that I'll just mention that have peer-reviewed research to support them: elevating your feet either with a pillow or by elevating the end of your bed by about 3 to 5 degrees can be really beneficial for increasing the depth of sleep. I do want to mention a couple of broad contour tools that will impact your ability to sleep really well on a consistent basis. And the one that impacts the most number of people is weekends. Turns out that most everybody feels the impulse to sleep in on the weekend, especially if they've been out late the night before. However, the data show that keeping relatively consistent sleep and wake times is really going to enhance the quality and depth of your sleep. So if you stay out late one night, sure, you might allow yourself to sleep in an extra hour or so, but you should really try to avoid sleeping in longer than an hour beyond your normal wake-up time. Sleep is the absolute foundation of your mental health, your physical health, and your performance in all endeavors. So if there's one area of your life to really focus on and try and optimize, if your goal is to be happier and more productive and just to have a better life overall, I can confidently say that sleep is really the thing to optimize.